Welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving deep into one of the most pressing global topics. Environmental movements in the Global South are not only about saving trees or protecting wildlife, they're about survival, justice, and cultural heritage. You'll want to stick around for this one because there's a lot we can all learn from these inspiring stories of resilience.
Absolutely. The Global South, regions like Latin America, Africa, and South Asia, are home to some of the most powerful grassroots environmental movements on the planet. These aren't just policy-driven or academic, they are everyday people standing up for their livelihoods and their lands.
So let's start with what makes these movements different. When people think of environmental activism, they often picture protests or lobbying for climate policies. But in the Global South, environmentalism is tied directly to people's survival. It's not just about preserving nature for the future, but about protecting resources communities need right now.
Exactly. A perfect example is the Chipko movement in India. Women literally hugged trees to prevent deforestation because cutting down those trees threatened their water, firewood, and livelihoods. It's where the term tree hugger originated, but not in the way many people might think.
The stories of grassroots movements in the Global South are incredible. These are not large, well-funded organizations. These are local communities, sometimes with nothing but their voices and sheer determination. Like the Ogoni people in Nigeria. For decades, they've been fighting against the environmental destruction caused by oil extraction in their region.
Yes, and their activism has included everything from non-violent protests to legal battles against multinational corporations. It's truly a David versus Goliath situation.
What's really powerful is that these movements are about more than just the environment. They're about social justice, economic survival, and cultural identity. Take the rubber tappers in Brazil or the fishers in Indonesia. These communities are not only protecting their ecosystems, but also their way of life.
One of the complexities these movements face is globalization. It's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, global trade and multinational corporations are responsible for much of the environmental degradation in these regions. On the other hand, globalization has also allowed these movements to gain international attention and support.
Right. It's this delicate balance. While globalization has introduced new challenges, like multinational corporations exploiting natural resources, it's also created opportunities for local movements to connect with global networks and get legal and financial support.
A great example is the water wars in Bolivia. Citizens fought against the privatization of their water supply by a multinational corporation and won. It was a triumph for grassroots activism.
Something that really stands out is the role of Indigenous-led movements. Indigenous communities have always been the original environmental stewards, but now we're seeing them take on even greater leadership roles in the fight for environmental justice.
Their approach is often radically different from mainstream environmentalism. It's not just about protecting nature for its intrinsic value. For them, the land is deeply tied to cultural identity, spirituality, and their very existence. In Ecuador, for instance, indigenous groups helped enshrine into the national constitution, giving ecosystems legal standing. That's groundbreaking. But with leadership comes risk. Indigenous environmental defenders are often at the front lines of the fight, facing real threats of violence and even assassination. One story that stands out is that of Berta Cáceres, an indigenous activist from Honduras who was tragically murdered for opposing a dam project that threatened her community's water resources.
It's heartbreaking to see people sacrificing their lives just to protect their land and communities. The Global North needs to recognize these sacrifices and do more to support these movements. So, the big question, how can those of us in the Global North make a difference? It starts with awareness, learning about and amplifying the stories of these movements.
Definitely. But beyond that, it's also about the choices we make. For example, supporting companies with ethical sourcing practices or choosing products that are fair trade certified. And don't underestimate the power of consumer pressure. Reaching out to companies to ask about their environmental practices can lead to real change.
Political engagement is another key. Writing to your representatives, voting in local elections, and supporting policies that prioritize environmental justice can have a huge impact. We've covered a lot today: grassroots activism, Indigenous leadership, globalization, and the immense challenges these communities face. The stories of environmental movements in the Global South are both inspiring and sobering, but most of all, they remind us that we all have a role to play.
Exactly. Whether it's through our actions, our purchases, or our voices, we can all be part of the solution. Let's take inspiration from these movements and work together for a more just and sustainable future for everyone.
Thanks for joining us today. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications so you never miss a new episode. Let's keep this conversation going in the comments. What environmental movements inspire you? We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and let's make a difference.